mortality rates. I haven't got those to hand, but we've got them, and we can come back to you on that.
Yeah, just to be aware of, just so that we can kind of, especially as part of this discussion, if we've got a couple of obviously items on this. Did you mention about the cost of the double plot? Sorry, as well.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
The exclusive rights burial?
No, double plot, double grave. Again, it's in our fees and charges, and I haven't got that to hand. Right, but again, okay. I can supply that.
But we could have a look at that, yeah, because obviously that feeds into the picture of, I mean, I'm not sure I necessarily agree. I think that actually comes in later when we look at the second or the next item. But yeah, it seems a bit strange if you're buying a double plot and you're buying one next to it, that adds extra complexity to me, because it seems like, I mean, they seem to have problems as well with leaving those plots next to one another, because then that's difficult to dig and access. So I don't know whether that's actually the problem whether we're addressing the problem there, with those spaces still needing to be digged, and then that person is then still not charged for that second plot. So I don't actually know if that's solving the problem that we're trying to there. I really did like the refund policy in 5.1. I thought that was really good. The Corby spaces, they're obviously already incredibly limited.
Yes.
So I guess what I wanted to understand more is that going to continue to have no reservations given the limited space that is there? I mean, I suppose it would make sense if that's the case. And are we going to have some sort of policy for other cemeteries if we get to, again, a reservation of like 90% plus or something like that to limit? Because obviously we need to also have some space for some other residents who are just going to need that. And also where families have been able to just endlessly reserve kind of for free, could or should this be reviewed? Is that a fair way forward? Because if they've got lots of spaces for a whole family, I mean, is that really fair? And people, so I didn't know if that's something that we're considering, or if we want to put in some sort of policy around that. The other thing that I will probably be talking about more in the next section is the fact that the green burials weren't really looked at as part of this. No. And I think that could have been, it's omitted obviously from the climate impact because it's not been talked about, but turning soil, cremations, all of the traditional ways of burying people have both produced carbon. Turning soil produces quite a lot of carbon. So actually green burials, where they're a lot more, they don't literally turn as much soil, is often quite a bit better, and that's just not been mentioned. Just seeing if I've got anything else. Evidence of purchase. Okay. There was one little bit, I'm sorry, I haven't written down which part this was, but it basically said in terms of, it was for the refund. It said that this would be fine as long as people were able to show evidence of purchase, but it wasn't clear what we would do if no evidence of purchase was found. I mean, this is obviously very hypothetical, but I mean, in some cases when people pass away, documents do go awry, and I think it would be worthwhile as just knowing what the process might be if and when something like that should happen. So, thank you.
Okay. So, green burials are not included because they're a separate issue, and there's no provision for green burials there are only provisions for green burials at certain cemeteries in Northamptonshire. At the moment, that's Rothwell Cemetery. That's a whole different topic that is on the list to be worked on.
If I help out there, Chair. So in terms of green burial policy, we do intend to bring a future policy for consideration by committee, because I know it's been discussed effectively previously by Scrutiny around green burials, and we did put an options paper in front of Scrutiny Committee previously, and we got some feedback. I think originally there was going to be a working group set up around this to take this further. I understand now we've been asked to actually go away and produce a policy document in relation to this and consult through EAPs, and potentially there might be an option.
That's it. The Scrutiny asked for an EAP to produce it, as there wasn't a policy, to produce a policy in the normal sphere of event things. Yeah.
But Sam's correct in terms of the current only burial ground within Northamptonshire's control that offers green burials is Rothwell. So potentially there are other options that could be considered around that, and we will be looking to actually bring some options further for consideration to members on that matter. But that isn't obviously what's in scope in terms of the report that's in front of you for consideration today. There was a few other issues that were raised around Shire Lodge and concerns about future space and limitations, etc. Then obviously with the extension of Shire Lodge, which obviously the next report addresses or seeks to address in terms of how we might manage that space for a different set of regulations going forward, then clearly that gives the option for additional burial capacity in Corby for up to the next 20 years. So in terms of that issue, then there's not an immediate space limitation in terms of being able to expand into that burial ground in terms of additional space. But obviously what we're trying to address in terms of this report is the ongoing management of burial space within our burial grounds, in that we have got a real problem in terms of there's a number of plots that are reserved and are never taken up due to the fact that it's relatively easy and low cost currently to actually reserve a plot, which then causes a problem because clearly, you know, the capacity of the cemetery is being used at a much faster rate than people are actually passing. So what we're trying to do is align the actual occupation and use of the space within the cemetery more in line with what the levels of mortality are within the respective districts. And the sort of accepted practice in terms, if you weren't, of how best to address that is through the use of a reservation policy. And I guess the issue is then about, well, what level should the reservation policy be set, if you agree with the principle of that in terms of a sum, and over what period of time, etc., should it be set for. And obviously there's a number of different options there which members consider, but officers' view, as it's been put forward in the report, is that you know, the Kettering model is probably an appropriate benchmark to use, set at the fee that Sam's described at £2,513 for a 99-year period, etc. So, yes, the other question I think you raised was around evidence of purchase, if that wasn't to be found. I mean, clearly we'd have records of our own in relation to
yes, because the owner of the right of the exclusive right to burial has a right to go in there regardless. They don't have to give permission, obviously, because they've passed away. So they have the right to be buried within that grave. If somebody else is to go in that grave and the owner has passed away, then they have to go through either by deed of grant or probate to transfer the ownership to the next of kin. So that's how it works if somebody goes in, if the owner has passed away.
So there is a route for that to be addressed, which is effectively recognised in terms of legal ownership, etc. and transfer.
Yes, if the deceased is going in the grave, we don't need the actual grant, because the deceased has the automatic right to go in there because they've purchased it to be buried in there. It's only a change of ownership if somebody else is going in and the owner's passed away.
I think just to clarify, my query was more about if they were trying to have a refund and they didn't want to have that grave anymore but couldn't prove proof of purchase of that plot. What's our process for that? But it sounds like there probably are other legal routes that would be acceptable.
They would go down the same route to prove ownership, either by, they would go through the courts, they'd do a statutory declaration through a solicitor, to do ownership. So then they would indemnify the council of any wrongdoing. So if there is any comeback on it, then obviously that's down to them to do through the courts, as opposed to us.
Yeah. Absolutely. And just if I may come back on the other points that were raised. So I think what I'm trying to really get at here is the fact that, are we trying to prohibit people taking up reservations, which I believe we are, in which case the fee needs to be essentially set based on what is prohibitive to each individual. And whilst I appreciate it would be more administratively difficult to level out I think people do expect to be asked from the council how much they earn or for various things like this sort of thing. They do expect for housing, for anything where they're dealing with the council, this is something that we often have to ask. And I think you could easily do something such as like the average salary, the highest salary in the household, and just keep it as... there are obviously ways to do it. I'm not obviously suggesting, one particular way, but I do think staggering it as such. I mean, this is something that Finland do for quite a lot of their various different services. I think we should necessarily not just be looking at other councils, but looking at other countries and how they are doing things and how it's working very successfully. So, yeah, I think that is what I would support. I also think a payment plan would be great, but having something like that where you're staggering the amount would actually mean that potentially a payment plan may not be as necessary. It's then tailored to the person. So, and hopefully potentially a bit simpler. But thank you.
Okay. I just want to pick up, I found it very strange that I owned my father's grave, but I was given a certificate, almost a deed. I don't know if we do that. So
Yes.
A piece of paper. It took me ages to find it, but I did. So a couple of things, I've got some others as well, but I'll pick up a couple of things that Mr. Smith has said. There's a comment in 4.4, which I think you just backed up, that some reserve plots are never used. And I wondered at what point we look at that, and originally, I mean, after 50 years, do we start to ask whether that is still a live reservation or whatever? And the other one, it talks about in 4.5 about it uses the phrase pepper potting of spaces. So obviously, in Charlotte, you won't be able to double height because of the formation, which we'll have in the next report. But in some of the others, I mean, obviously the situation arises that somebody dies and they want their partner next to them, so we're effectively reserving one, but reserving a second because, and the situation of children, I mean, motor accident and the whole family, something. Does this new policy mean that when people reserve, they will automatically get the one next door, so you'll still get this pepper potting effect? Or are we looking at some way of reducing the difficulty for staff with that? I mean, there's opportunities here. Obviously, every circumstance can be different, and that's the problem with it. And I can understand why people wouldn't want to reserve. They may have got, the partner may have remarried and moved away, and all sorts of things might have happened. But at what point, A, at what point do we look at that, and B, what is the actual procedure going to be for reserve ones being next to each other?
Okay, so with regard to the reserve graves not being used, we don't at this time look at anything that's not being used. Once it's been purchased or reserved, that's it. Unless somebody comes back to us and says they no longer want the grave, they've reserved it, and it just sits as if it was a used plot already.
So they're reserving at the moment a particular geographical spot.
Yes.
But in future, will they be doing that, or will they just be in the queue and take their place?
When they reserve plots, it's just the next one in line. They can't pick where they want to go in the cemetery. So it's just the next one in line.
If you're getting pepper potting, then it sounds like they are reserving a particular spot.
Just to be clear then, sorry Chair, on this, when you reserve, effectively, there's effectively, if you imagine a sort of map of the cemetery, which effectively plots out individual grave plots throughout areas of the cemetery, and obviously, we've got records that indicate basically who's where and what's available. So Jane's right in terms of what she said. If you effectively look to reserve a grave, you reserve the next available plot, effectively where it is in the cemetery. I think the problem that we've got that this policy is designed to address is multiple reservations, where we've got family members effectively who are looking to reserve numerous plots in some cases even a row or two rows, etc., which in some cases never get occupied and then seriously start to reduce the capacity of the cemetery over time and reduce the life of the cemetery over time. So this is what this policy is really trying to actually manage in a more effective way. And in terms of the issue around what you've said about pepper potting, I mean, what we've said in terms of the fact that where previously we've offered double depth graves, which clearly would allow two people to go into one grave in terms of two family members, because of what we're going to consider in the next report around issues to do with ground conditions, we're now suggesting that we only offer single depth graves, and where that effectively facility is in place, we would ask the people at the time whether they would still wish to reserve the grave next to that to allow another family member to go adjacent to the single depth grave. And at that point, they wouldn't pay a reservation fee, because under normal circumstances, they'd have been able to have a double depth grave. But because of the situation with ground conditions, that isn't what would be offered. So then they wouldn't suffer any detriment as a consequence of that. Now clearly, hopefully that addresses the sort of two principal issues there that you raised.
So would that be different from Kettering or Wellingborough, where you, if you wanted not to have double depth but have side by side, you would pay a reservation fee?
You would, because
Yes.
we offer double depth graves.
Okay. Councillor Pengelly was next. I know you do.
The way it looks is as if Corby's just got no spaces. We've got a new graveyard about to open in Corby, and we're coming to the end of life, but not end of life, because the Shire Lodge Cemetery, I know people that have reserved places in there, so that's going to be active for the next 100 years at least. But it's nearly full now. So how many spaces are there in the new cemetery when you're talking about the 91.2%? That's in the cemetery now that is almost full, which you would expect for a cemetery that's almost full. How many spaces are there in the new cemetery?
2,900.
2,900. So therefore that 91% just falls out of the equation. Yes. So that should have been explained to people, because it doesn't look like that. It looks like that we've only got 80 odd spaces left or whatever, and I think that should have been put a little bit more clear. One thing that I think that this does ask questions on is we have to really look at future provision. And I remember saying to Ian 15 years ago that our graveyard was getting full. I remember being mocked for it, saying Mark Pengelly's talking rubbish for me going to the paper, and it was right, because it filled up very, very quickly. The figures that we get, that we rely on, are not figures we can, because we don't know when people are going to die. And the population coming into Corby isn't always a young population. I know a lot of people have come in from Eastern Europe, brought granddads, whatever, that die and want to get buried in Corby. So that's things that we have to look at going forward. I think we have to start looking now at all our graveyards and seeing what we need for the future, what extensions we need, because I know the problems we had with Corby, Ian, and they were really, really big problems on where we're going to do that extension. And we've got to start looking at the future extension for Corby now, not in 10 years' time. There's no point putting things off when you can do them today. In relation to the report itself, I agree with what Councillor McGee says, and I know what the officer said, that this is what the consultation exercise is about. That's what this committee is about. And I think this committee is saying clearly that we look at a position where people can pay off the fee, because what you'll have is a very middle-classy position of people with money being able to secure their cemetery places, and those people on low pay in agencies not being able to do it. That just doesn't seem fair to me or anyone else. So I think that's something we could look at. Just say, look, and I think a year's not a time to pay it. A lot of people that buy the plots are younger. They're in the 30s and 40s. My nephew and niece just bought their plots about 6 months ago. They won the last lot to do it in Corby. And so it's a lot of younger people that do it. So just say, look, you've got 3 or 4 years to pay it. If you don't pay it, then we'll take it off you. But you've got 3 or 4 years to pay it off. If you want 2 plots for yourselves and your mum and dad or whatever, that's £4,000, doesn't it? Leave £5,000. So I think that's something that I'd like to move, that this committee asks you to look at and bring forward.
Chair, if I may just come back on the future planning issue, I think, as Sam said, we do have knowledge around what capacity issues we've got in the existing cemeteries. We have got proposals in place for actually providing additional provision for the Wellingborough area. Obviously, we've got the extension for Shire Lodge in Corby. There's potential for extension at Warren Hill, in Kettering, etc. So we do effectively have future plans in place for actual cemetery provision for the Northants area, and we do reference basically mortality statistics and look at trends in terms of burials, etc. But Councillor Pengelly's right, you can't predict what the future rates of death are going to be in terms of mortality. So they are sort of educated estimates, but I don't see how we're able to get beyond that. But I just wanted to assure members of the committee that we do have plans in place for future provision. Thank you.
Could we see them plans, please? Could you forward them to us?
I'm happy to discuss that directly with Councillor Pengelly outside the meeting, because I mean, I'm not sure in what format that they're not plans in terms of written down on pieces of paper necessarily that you would recognise as being a plan. They're effectively the statistics around basically what the level of space is that's left in terms of grave spaces in the cemeteries as indicated in the reports, and then basically we've got specific arrangements in place for specific areas about future planning. So you know what the arrangements are for Shire Lodge, because we're discussing those this evening. We've sort of highlighted what the arrangements are in relation to Wellingborough, which are aligned with the sort of Section 106 contribution for Stanton Cross, so we can provide further details about that. The planning around that hasn't progressed around actually the infrastructure planning yet. That's something that effectively we would seek to do as soon as we hit the triggers. And then in relation to Kettering, clearly we can provide some further details about what arrangements we're already taking to potentially extend the Warren Hill crematory. And those are the principal plans that are in play at the moment. So we can provide a briefing note if needed on all of those to give members an update.
Okay, Councillor Nichols next.
Thank you. On Councillor Fedorovic's point on like a progressive fee, I'm not sure that's the fairest way to do it. I think a flat fee is there in general. You know, everyone should have to pay the same fee regardless of their financial income. However, Councillor McGee and Councillor Pengelly, I do agree, why not have some sort of payment plan? You did mention that it would be £2.12 a month if it's rounded monthly. Obviously with administration fees, I could see that being around £3 a month. I think people would realistically pay that. I think that's something which people would do, and I think it would be realistic for the council to get out. It's a very small amount of money. However, a lot of people would happily pay that, I think.
Yeah. We would have to come up with a more constrained payment plan over the 99 years.
Okay, Councillor Coleman.
Thank you. Right, it was interesting actually that Councillor Fedorovic mentioned levelling up. At the moment, Rushden, along with I believe Raunds and Thrapston and a few others, are responsible for our own cemeteries, and we are actually at the same talking that we are here. We had to remove our reservations 2 years ago because we haven't got enough space, and we're looking for other places at the moment to do it. And obviously, you've got to wait for your 106s, but you've got to look ahead of yourselves. And as Councillor Pengelly said, it takes time. So this has been a 10-year process. But I would like to sort of put together what Councillor McGee mentioned about multi-generation sort of families looking. I think we've sadly come to a stage that the way we do things has changed dramatically. We tend to look at each generation as it happens because we haven't got the facilities to facilitate doing multiple plots. Because I think you pointed out the fact that if one family takes on 2 rows, you've lost a considerable amount of space that would be otherwise used. I think having the opportunity to do a couple plot, to be able to do it next to each other, a friend of mine sadly has just had to use it, and then the next generation think where their plot's going to be. I know it's not ideal, but sometimes it helps with the provision for the rest of the actual area. I think through it, everybody else has said an awful lot of what I was going to say before I had a chance to speak. So thank you. I think it's a case of it is known across the authority. We are all struggling.
Chair, if I may, just to sort of, there are some options around those sorts of issues in terms of, you know, I mean, I don't know this is a matter of personal choice, but if you chose to be cremated, you can have up to 6 sets of cremated remains in a plot. So that would allow more members of a family to be buried collectively if they chose to. But obviously that's down to a preference about whether you wish to be cremated or buried. But I just thought that might be a helpful thing for you to consider.
Yeah. And it might be worth the individual towns, Raunds, Rushden, looking at what 106 money they can get for provision of a bit of land for future growth. I mean, they'll have to do that in their neighbourhood plans and so on. Just looking through it, in 5.1, there's some issues and choices, and I would just, personally, the third option to have the possibility of returning the plot and having some rebate, it seems to me sensible and fair, and an option that should be included. One thing that's not in here at all. You've got equality implications in 7, but there's no real mention at all about the various different ethnicities and their different burial requirements. I noticed we facilitated a Hindu funeral at Chester House the other day, so it was something new for us. But obviously they are mentioned in various places, but I would have thought the report could help a bit more on that. And then when we get to the actual report, 3.1, reserving a grade, it just occurred to me that if I were to reserve a plot somewhere and I would therefore be the owner, and then I was to die, how are you going to prove? Because I'm not going to be able to produce my utility bills and stuff. How are you going to prove that I am the owner if a distant relative or a solicitor is having to arrange matters? Also, in that same paragraph, it talks about non-residents. If I was somebody, for instance, living in Castle Ashby, I'd probably look to Wellingborough for my requirements rather than Milton Mouser. I don't know if we've got any latitude for people who are resident of West Northamptonshire who may have, till 3 years ago, expected to have the choice.
So if you're a non-resident, you can't reserve, but you can be buried at the time of death in a Northamptonshire cemetery. You pay double the fees. That's the policy at the moment.
And Chair, that's not inconsistent with how it's dealt with in other areas. Again, it's trying to actually take action to preserve effectively grave spaces for the area's residents, etc. So whilst you're still allowing other residents to be buried there, effectively
there's a premium.
There's a premium that they have to pay as being a resident from outside the area.
And go on.
And if you're the grave owner and you've passed away, as Jane says, there's no deed. You have the automatic right to go in that grave, so that's all accounted for.
But how are people going to know it?
We know, we've got all records at the crematorium of who's buried where, so we know who the deed holders are. We know who because you'll obviously be registered, so we take the details from your registration document and then check it against our records. So we've got computerised and paper records.
Okay, so anyway. And the last thing, in section 4, you talk about some restrictions on headstones. Presumably that detail is in another policy somewhere.
Yes,
it would be helpful to have a link to that policy underneath, because you haven't mentioned dimensions, but it would be helpful to have a link so that people were able to find those. Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I say, so we have been through this on Town Council. I agree that people that aren't resident pay double. Absolutely agree with that, because there's insufficient space for the residents that we have. So the main problem that we're trying to solve here is, I'll call it the Corby issue. It isn't just Corby, I can see that. But it is the issue of people reserving lots of space, and then potentially they could well, they could die anywhere, couldn't they? They could be buried in Birmingham, but they've got a whole load of space here reserved. We as a council aren't looking at that space, so we're never reacquiring it, and that's a separate issue, and we should be doing that. I don't know how we do that. So it's a shame that we have to do it, but I understand that the reason we do have to. I'm sure those people that were reserving multiple spots didn't appreciate the problems they were going to cause for their neighbours, but I mean, it is one of those things that happens, isn't it? I don't believe that we should have a sliding scale. The cost of administering those things typically is more than you're saving anyway. But I just don't believe that a pensioner with a slightly larger pension than her neighbour should have to pay more to be buried next to the husband. It just does not seem fair to me. If she wants to reserve a space to be buried next to her husband, well, there should be equal opportunity to do it. You can't do it based on income. Somebody might have a higher income, they might have higher outgoings. That just does not seem fair. They either have a right to choose to be buried next to a loved one, or they don't. I don't think we can start penalising people because their pensions might be slightly bigger. I agree with a payment plan, although, of course, I think now of my own situation. There is already a payment plan because there's no urgency for me to do it. So if I want to reserve some spaces, I can either say to the council, reserve them today and I'll pay over the next 5 years, or do you know what, I'll save up over the next 5 years and I'll just book them in 5 years' time. If I die within the next 5 years, it's irrelevant anyway. So there is already a payment plan. It is not one of those things that there is an urgency to have today. So whilst I accept that as I said, I did let you speak. So whilst I accept that there are going to be circumstances where some elderly people will want to be secure in having that space now and may want to spread the payment, and I have no problems with that. I think for the vast number of situations, if you could save up for it, in theory. But if we can do a payment plan and it doesn't become onerous, but of course there's the easiest thing in the world that we haven't really discussed, if we want to make it more affordable, is just reduce the fee and reduce the term. At 99 years, we're an outlier. There is no, you've given us some comparative councils. There is no other council outside of London that's using 99 years. Some of them are using 5, some are using 10. And I accept that there is an additional administrative burden by renewing that, because we've got to go through a whole process again. But if we did it as an example for 50 years, we'd be more in line with some of the other councils, but presumably the cost is halved. Accepting that if I'm still alive in another 50 years, clearly it won't be, but then I would pay again for another 50 years. So it is staged payments, because it's staged payments based on how long you need to keep renewing it for. So I certainly think that's worth looking at. But controversially, I'm not sure it fixes the big problem. If we are saying, and I accept what Councillor Pengelly said, he's absolutely right, of course, and I haven't got the figures, but there is another graveyard, there is another plot of land coming in Corby. That doesn't alter the fact that there is a whole load of land reserved for people that may never use it. They might even be alive now. So, and I'm not sure that it's fair that if I lived in Corby, I could go and say, well, actually, I'd like to reserve those 5 spaces for me. I don't know which one I'll choose. I could choose closer to the day I die, but I'll choose. I know that's stopping another 4 people being buried there, and maybe they're next to their families. I don't care. I'm just going to choose those 5. I'm not too sure that's fair at all. So I actually think that the council, certainly we should look at trying to reacquire plots that we know are no longer needed. But actually, I think that if we're not going to retrospectively charge the people that have reserved it, we should at least be going back to people that have reserved multiple spaces to say, you probably didn't appreciate the problem you were causing at the time that you did it, but this is the problem that we have. So, yes, we're not going to retrospectively charge you, but choose a spot and free up the others for other people's loved ones. But other than those, I agree. Absolutely, I agree. We've got to harmonise it. We've got to resolve it. It is this committee's responsibility to propose these. We've got to try and resolve a problem of poor people not being able to bury their loved ones because somebody else has reserved a ton of space.
Might be worth justifying why we've chosen 99 years as opposed to 50 or 75 or... I've got you.
That's the maximum that we can celebrate for, so that's why we did it at 99. There's no reason why we can't change it. We can sell it for as long as we want to.
Yeah. But you've come up with a recommendation of 99. You must have had
That's
a
for
reason.
ease of administration, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, and I absolutely appreciate that. It is the most effective way of doing it to set it for the longest period of time. But then it is the most costly for the residents. So there is a balance, isn't there? If you could do it every year, the resident wouldn't need a payment plan. It would be much cheaper. But
Just
the
the
admin would be huge. So I just think 50 years, you know, it's in the middle. It halves the cost to the residents.
Anybody who's old enough to buy it isn't going to want it in 99 years' time. They're going to want it in less. And if it's a relative and a parent they're buying it for instance, certainly. Councillor Fedorovich, you come in.
Thank you, Chair. The way that you phrased that, Councillor Wilkes, poor people should be able to reserve a grave. That is how you finished all of your comments. And that is exactly why a sliding scale is absolutely needed. This shouldn't be a question of, oh, well, most people can pay. Quite a lot of people can pay quite easily to £2,500. Lots and lots and lots of people cannot. Lots of people cannot do that. And actually, we're not resolving this problem if we have a static price, quite frankly, because some people can afford many graves at that price. And then they will buy up many graves at that price. So we're not actually stopping, we're not solving this problem. Actually, your point was interesting when you said about having pensioners who are on slightly different pensions or something like that, actually having a sliding scale but potentially in brackets. You do come up with a fair point there. We don't want people who are kind of in a similar essentially like pay bracket, if you like, that paying vastly different fees, because maybe that isn't quite so fair. So maybe that is something that we could address with maybe 4 or 5 different brackets. So if you're within this amount, as is the case for sort of other administrative options. But also, I mean, a payment plan is going to cause additional administration. This would, I would say, cause probably equal. I mean, this is possibly a question for officers. Maybe I don't know. But I also think we have a duty to do what's right. That is part of what we do as a council. We're here to serve the public and to do what is fair, right and fair. The reason why I brought the green boreals up, and I will be talking about this much more in detail the next topic, but the fact is this is a sustainability problem. We don't have a sustainable way forward. And quite frankly, especially going, as we're going to talk about shortly, from double graves to single graves, we've just shortened that even more. So we have to start talking about this, and we'll get onto that in some sort of point. But actually, if we're going to try and, if this needs to be slightly prohibitive, it needs to be prohibitive in the right way. And I am concerned. I'm concerned about some people who cannot pay for this. So unless we can have some sort of scale and go with that, I won't be supporting this. But I really do think we need to address this, and I really appreciate everything you brought forward today. So thank you.
Councillor McGee was first, so
Feel free to come back and then I'll take it, because I think I'm on a slightly different topic.
all right, okay. I want to wrap this up soon.
I'm happy with that, but I do need to clarify. So when I'm saying poor people, I'm talking about the people whose families have died. That is a definition of a poor person can be somebody who's just experienced death. I'm not talking, yes, I accept what you're saying. I was using your figures. You said somebody that's on £100,000 could pay £10,000. That's exactly the figure. It can't be based on income. It's got to be based on disposable income, if anything. But you can't just presume that an elderly person on a pension in a slightly larger house with larger outgoings should have to pay more than somebody next door. You just can't do that. It's just, that isn't fair. It just isn't fair.
Councillor McGee, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair.
Wrap it up.
I'm happy to keep it short. To be fair, I don't actually disagree with what Councillor Fedorovich is saying. Equal opportunity is about being responsive to people's needs. It's not about a one-size-fits-all thing. That's not what equal opportunity is. But, I mean, regardless, I sense what will get support and what won't get support. So I would like to suggest that I can't support this unless there is something exclusively written in the recommendations of the report that says that this committee, in majority, would like officers to investigate a potential payment plan for people when doing this. Unless that is within this report, I'm afraid I won't support it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so if I can wrap it up, we can do two things. We can either recommend to officers to think of something, or we can recommend to executive something. So I'm going to go through them one by one. So I think we can all agree on the repurchase bit, 75% if you've purchased and don't need it. We're all happy with that one. Yeah, so that's a recommendation to executive to accept that one. The next one would be, in my opinion, the actual length and therefore the price. So that would be for us to recommend to officers to look at that and for their recommendations to executive. They may come up with the same answer for executive, but I think that they should be asked to just look and consider other options in the length and therefore the price. And the third thing that's come out of this would be to ask officers to look at some payment options. I mean,
payment plan options. I think the word plan needs to be in
because
there.
payment plans may not be because the right way, but payment options might be give them a wider scope because it could be other things that they could think of. They may not have something, and they may not, and the executive may not accept. But if officers can look at that as part of the as their preparation for the report, so is everybody happy with
sorry,
that?
Chair, I worry that unless the word plan is in there, that this is going to get slightly diluted and perhaps changed.
Plan implies a formal legal.
But it doesn't have to say we recommend there is a payment plan. It just has to say we would like to support options for a potential payment plan. The wording can be very loose, but I just slightly worry that unless the word plan or spreading the cost or spreading the cost, I don't mind the semantics of it. I just want that to be implied and quite clearly implied, because I think that was kind of the general consensus of the room, and I worry that if the wording gets changed, it will be diluted a wee bit. Is that? I think that's fair, judging by the people's faces. Spread the cost, I'm happy with, but I would just like that to be quite clear.
I'm just worried it looks like a formal finance agreement. And we have funeral plans as it is, and I've never had one, but they will involve, no doubt, some form of finance and some form of interest or charge. And I'm not sure we want to have a plan that may involve extra charges for financing. That's all I was just as far as.
No, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just worried that the semantics are going to get diluted. That's all.
Sorry, go on.
Chair, that's a good point, but actually it's wider than that, because I'm not happy just to say to the executive we've just got to look at spreading the costs. They've got to look at the payment options. It may be that they decide that actually what they want to do is give a discount to anybody that's already buried. So it's a wider looking at the options.
Perhaps there could be a mention of payment considerations for people from lower income backgrounds or something. I just really want to make it clear what the theme from this conversation was, because I've got a feeling in these words that's just getting slightly diluted. I'm a bit worried about what will happen from that.
That's why I'm saying payment options, because if you say plan, you're discounting the opportunity to give, say, a discount for somebody on universal credit.
Then could that be payment plans in recognition of those with lower income or something, just to make that really crystal, because it does worry me a wee bit. You're not calming my fears, Chair. I'm not going to lie to you.
If I may, potentially, couldn't we have the low-income options as like payment options for low-income backgrounds, or those? Because then you're getting the feel of it. But I think then options, as you're sort of trying to suggest, can be explored.
Like that I'm happy with, as long as it exclusively mentions payment options for people from low-income backgrounds.
Chair, would payment scheduling not work a bit?
Well, I don't know.
I know I've now introduced a discussion of semantics, which is my pet peeve about every single one of these meetings that I sit in. But I am really concerned that it could get diluted.
It may anyway. But
and I don't want to get involved in semantics. I want to go home at some stage. But I wouldn't support that. We cannot just be saying that it's on lower income. So I have elderly neighbours who have a big pension that comes in. I help them look after their money. Their outgoings are huge. They are not wealthy people. So I'm not going to support something that just says you've got to be on a lower income. It's got to be. It's about affordability, not
I'm
income.
happy with that. I'm happy with that.
So payment options based on affordability. I'm more than happy to support something like that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I'm a little bit confused by, you said two different things. You said going to the executive and going to the officers. I would. Yeah. We still have the consultation exercise to come forward yet, and I would like the officers to take on board what we've said and them to bring a paper to the executive. If this just went to the executive, this is what we said, the members like us will say, well, what's there? What options are there? What do you mean plan? Whatever. Let's get the officers doing a full report. That's exactly
we're asking officers to take this as part of the consultation, to put it into the report to the executive. The one thing that we were clear about is that we were happy with the first one. Any other points that we want to make out of the discussion? By the way, I thought that you could only reserve one. I thought that was the part of the rule. So you can't make multiple reservations in future. I thought that was the point. Yeah. Mind you, two children can make one for the mother and one for the father, I suppose. But, same effect. Yeah. Okay. So we've got 3 recommendations there. You're happy? You've got them after all that? Okay, thank you, everybody. And then on to item 7, which is the Shire Lodge extension. Mr. Smith, you're going to...
Thank you, Chair. This report proposes the consideration of the application of lawn cemetery regulations to the new extension at Shire Lodge Cemetery, as set out in Appendix A to the report, and we're asking place an Environmental Scrutiny Committee to review and comment on the application of those proposed regulations relating to the use of the new Shire Lodge extension as a consultee, and consider, in order that we can consider any comments so made and refer those and consider those in terms of any report that's subsequently put to executive, which is scheduled to go in front of executive in October. And again, I'll defer to Sam to actually summarise the content of the report. Thank you.
Okay, so this paper is purely about the extension at Shire Lodge Cemetery. It's about how we operate the cemetery going forward, how we manage it. The extension provides an additional 2,900 spaces, plots. The extension was planned and built as a lawn cemetery, and it's now ready to be brought into use. And as we've heard from the previous paper, we need to bring it into use. So we ask in the committee to consider that the proposal that the lawn cemetery regulations are applied, and this results in the cemetery being laid out with memorials in headstone borders. So it results in a peaceful and aesthetically pleasing layout. There's memorials only. There are no curb sets, which does have a potential benefit to the environment because there's no additional stone to mark out a curb set. It's just the headstone. And this maximises grave use and effectiveness of maintenance. There's still a choice for those families where there are still plots remaining in the rest of the cemetery, or where they have reserve plots. If they still want to go ahead and have curb sets, they can. But new graves, we would like to ask that it's run as a lawn cemetery. It also improves access for all users because unlike other cemeteries within Northamptonshire, Shire Lodge Cemetery, there's no distinct areas. So in Warren Hill, for example, at Kettering, or Doddington Road in Wellingborough, there are lawn cemetery areas or there are traditional areas. So you get curb sets all together, or you get just the headstone borders all together. In Corby, it's all in together. So, you know, if you have somebody who's got a pushchair or a wheelchair or limited mobility, you know, to visit a grave, they have to negotiate curb sets and other memorials. The second proposal with this policy is one we've also touched upon. It's the digging of single graves only because of the ground conditions at Shire Lodge Cemetery. It's heavy clay, and the additional work of digging a double-depth grave, regardless of whether it will be used as a double-depth or a single, is unnecessary. And, you know, Councillor McGee, I think you mentioned, or was it Councillor Federicks, the unlocking of carbon. So it would help a little in that. The final proposal is that we align the opening hours of Shire Lodge Cemetery to daylight, say, to the daylight hours, so that it maximises the health and safety of users within the cemetery. There are many obstacles in a cemetery due to the nature of it. There's memorials, there's curb sets, there's other furniture, there's taps, there's troughs for the water, you know, and when it's getting dusk, it can get dusk very quickly. Somebody's in there trying to tend to a grave, and then suddenly it's dark. This also the securing of the cemetery at dusk will also ensure that it's safer, and that there's not the time for people to go into the cemetery and potentially we've had people camping at Warren Hill or just antisocial behaviour in cemeteries, so it reduces those risks. So they are, and the cemeteries, all our cemeteries are open 365 days a year. So, you know, if people work in different shifts, there's weekends and bank holidays, they still open. Christmas Day, they can still go and attend the grave of a loved one. So they're the three things we're asking the committee to consider.
Okay, thank you. Can I just clarify something? On page 49, you've got the picture of the current hours.
Yes.
So I assume that's the current hours for Shire Lodge.
Yes.
And I assume that you're not going to have different hours for the extension and for Shire Lodge. So,
it will be across. That will be across the whole cemetery. So yes.
Yeah. So perhaps in the report, that's one thing that's not exclusive to the extension. You ought to make that slightly clear. Also, in the actual policy, in burials, item 6, the second sentence has no verb, so I don't know what it needs to be extended. Something's got left out there.
Where's that, sorry?
So burials, page 57,
yeah.
Item 6, the second paragraph, the second sentence. It's just a bit of tidying up.
Okay.
Open it up to members. Any? Councillor Fedorovich.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for this as well. And as we've already been talking, this is very much needed. I guess, I mean, I have already mentioned I'm going to be talking about green burials as part of this. My big concern, obviously, is the space and the fact that we're going from double, and understand the reasoning as well. There's obviously quite a lot of issues with the clay and the sort of water logging and all that sort of stuff. But I do, my one big question really is obviously, whilst I know a separate report is coming forward on green burials, it would be good to know why this wasn't considered as one of the options, especially because this would open up, we're talking about like 2,900 spaces, but with a green burial, there's a lot of benefits in terms of like the site. You only need to dig down 3.5 feet, so that would help with the issue of the clay and the problematic soil. So, I mean, my worry is also things like a green burial site would also mean limitless graves to a degree, of course, because it takes probably about 20 years maximum for the breakdown of bones. So, that would be. We just need to be thinking about more sustainable ways forward. And my other thing as well with the sort of lawn approach, which is obviously there are benefits for the versus full traditional, like you say, sort of like there is less land that's sort of paved over, but the other side of that is it will be a lawn, which generally tends to not have an awful lot of ecological value. Whereas we could, and in my opinion should, we want to be a bold, ambitious council. That's in our ethos. We should be looking at ways to work smarter, and by extending this area anyway, we have an opportunity here, I think, to potentially have this site as a green burial space. I would love to see us actually explore this before it goes to executive, explore it properly. I appreciate that we're going to have a proper policy come forward and report on green burials as a thing that we're looking at, but if we're extending other spaces, this is a great opportunity to even be something that draws people to our local area. We've got certain places like, what was it called? Bear with me. I made a little note here. I've lost where it is, but there are some beautiful green burial sites that are well known now for being almost tourist attractions, to be honest. So it's quite a lovely thing, and giving people that option as well to have different burial options, I think, is really important. I'll kind of come back to some of this, but the summer and winter hours makes absolute sense. I think the hours look perfect. Let me just skim down my bits. I will be a little bit direct, if I may. I've really found the impact assessment still quite a bit of a box-ticking exercise, and I don't mean this in any harsh sort of way, but just the fact that we haven't considered this means that we just are, like, sustainability isn't really integrated into our thinking yet, and this has really just shown it for me. So I would like to see us looking at how we can do things better, how we can do things, how we can be a bit bolder, and how sustainability can just be like kind of part of what we do. Page 58, it was like, I think it's number 3. It says, the council encourages individual and artistic memorialisation. I understand why this has probably been put in there. Obviously, we kind of want to make it like a nice and beautiful space. However, generally, traditional space cemeteries they're large stones, travel a large distance to be engraved and then placed with a cement foundation. Cement and the production of cement and concrete is responsible for 8% of global CO2 emissions, and each tonne of cement can produce nearly 1,400 pounds of CO2. So us encouraging people as a council to be elaborate with their memorialisation, I just don't think is the correct thing to do. I think if we want to encourage them to have a natural thing, sure. I think there's some beautiful like stones and beautiful wood things that people can do, especially that this is again why sort of green burial sites, that's more of the things that are encouraged in a more sort of progressive way of burying people. But also, I think if people want to do what they want to do, that's fine, but I just don't think we should be encouraging a higher carbon memorialisation. I just don't think that's the right thing to do. I am, however, really pleased to see on number 13 of the policy, really pleased to see that interments for the Muslim faith, and wanted just to query if other faiths have been consulted, as rightly Councillor Lorman suggested. That I think it's really good that we're including people, and that inclusivity is brilliant, really, really good. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you wanted to respond to the...
So just to come back on the green burial issue, I think as we previously acknowledged, we recognise that effectively that there probably needs to be more work carried out around like potential future options around green burials, and in order to do that we would look to bring together a draft green burial policy for consideration as members by members as we've originally indicated. I think there's a number of constraints in relation to this site that in our opinion as officers probably wouldn't lend itself to be the best green burial site for us to use, in the order that access is currently through the existing cemetery, which is not generally what's preferred for a green burial type site. And there's obviously certain constraints in terms of how the land's laid out, etc., and how it presents itself, etc. And obviously there's a need to manage demand and need as it currently presents itself for traditional burial space, and that's how this extension was designed. It was designed for that purpose. So I recognise that doesn't address the issue around green burials in relation to this site, but in terms of how it was designed and the plan brought forward and the capital scheme to deliver the site, it was never intended to be delivered as a green burial site. It was intended to be delivered as a more traditional burial site to meet future demand and need as it presents itself in terms of the Corby community. I'm not suggesting there's not untapped potential out there in terms of future green burials, and we recognise that, but we think we need to bring forward options around that, around what we would deem to be probably more alternative and appropriate sites and schemes. I think the other issue in terms of the lawn approach, I mean, obviously what we have tried to do here is improve, I guess, the sort of carbon impact of the site, although that hasn't been the primary driver here, but it is one of the sort of unintended consequences of what's been proposed with the lawn cemetery, in that there is effectively less memorialisation of the space, and it is more of the space is laid to lawn, etc. But the main driver around this was really around issues about maximising space, maximising the potential and the actual demand on maintenance, and trying to ensure that we can actually maintain this space in the best possible way, which generates the best value for money and presents itself in the most aesthetically pleasing way for residents and users.
Okay, Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with everything that's in the report. Really, it's hard to. I've never been one to accept that we should only have single depth graves, just because I think there are good reasons for having multi-depth ones. But I am prepared to accept that there are practical reasons, and the experts are telling us there are real reasons why we can't do it, and I'm all for accepting expert opinion on this. I'm really pleased to see that we're going for a lawn cemetery approach, and I say that as a council that has to deal in East North Hants with unkempt, non-lawn cemeteries, where there is a constant problem with curb sets falling over into neighbouring plots. I mean, it is something that happens, well, constantly. If I think of a number of the town councils that I support, it is on their agenda almost continuously that they're having to go around and try and find out who the owner is, because the curb set has fallen into a neighbouring plot and the neighbours don't want it there. So there are, of course, additional practical reasons for maintaining them. I know town councils across East North Hants are finding it increasingly difficult to maintain plots where there's no known family, so the family aren't going to look after it. Somebody has to, the council. It falls to the council. But you're trying to cut grass around the curb sets, and of course the contractors just don't want to do it, can't do it really. So no, I really welcome all of this. I think it makes perfect sense, and we'll end up with a better situation for everybody involved, really.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pengelly.
If Ian remembers, a couple of years before we were looking at the extension cemetery, we were looking at it anyway, but we brought a paper forward on green cemeteries through our scrutiny committee, and also I think it was Councillor Boyd, I think some of the Conservatives know Mr Boyd, who used to be a councillor Conservative, and he was looking at freezing bodies. Ian, do you remember that? We looked at ways of where you could freeze bodies and they disintegrate very, very quickly, and we looked at all that, and it just didn't work out for what we wanted, and what we decided was the information then wasn't like it'll be now, and we decided what we need to do was extend the cemetery. And when we did extend the cemetery, we looked at all faiths and non-Ian, I believe, because that was the question you asked. We didn't only just look for the Muslims, we spoke to other religious groups as well. Yeah, because that was a question, and I think we did, because I remember speaking to several myself.
Yeah, yes, Chair, through you, there was some consultation with other faith groups, but in terms of meeting needs, we felt we could meet the needs of the majority of faith groups through what's proposed through the lawn cemetery, and then obviously there's a specific designated area within the extension that relates specifically to Muslim burials.
Yeah, yeah, and going on to the report itself, Shire Lodge Cemetery is a lawn cemetery. And what happens with a lawn cemetery is Joe Bloggs goes out a little bit and gets away with it, then he goes out a little bit more, then somebody sees Joe's gone out and they go a little bit more, and we've seen it happen time and time again. And if you're going to have a lawn cemetery, they have to be strict rules. And one disappointment about this report, and I think we've made it clear it was going to be a lawn cemetery, but What we're doing is we're consulting after the fact. And so we're letting people know after the fact that we're changing the opening hours. We're letting people know after the fact. So we're not consulting, we're consulting on telling people. And that's not consultation, that's informing people. And there was a friends group up there, I don't know if they're still there now, Ian, the Friends of Charlotte Cemetery. I think they should have been informed of what's going on and kept up to date what's going on. And I don't know if they have or haven't, because they speak to me, a lot of the people, on a regular basis, telling me how good the cemetery's looking at the moment. So congratulations on that. But I think that what I've seen up that cemetery is we're not consistent. And the reports I'm getting about, I can't believe how believe that person's headstone is. It's totally against everybody else's, but we're not doing anything about it. Why is that, Mark? I've said nothing to do with me anymore. So speak to the chair, speak to the officers. So we have to have that consistent approach. As soon as you allow one person to move that little bit further out, then you've seen it in your cemeteries, happens all over. And just make sure we let people know what we're going to be doing. Don't just let it happen overnight. Let's start talking to people. I don't know if the press are watching this tonight. Let's get it out there. This is what we're looking at doing. Are you happy with this? Especially the opening times, because I noticed some of them are 4 o'clock, is it? Where I know some people that go to that cemetery every day, and the timing may stop some people from going for several months of the year because of work. So that might be something you may want to have to just look at 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock's a reasonable time, I think, to close anything. So if that's something you could look at, please.
Okay, thank you. If you want to respond.
I think with respect to ensuring that we maintain the extension as a lawn cemetery, hopefully what we're trying to achieve by putting these regulations forward for consideration, hopefully approval, is to give us the opportunity to be able to manage that and to be able to take action where people don't comply with those requirements, and to effectively start in the extension as we mean to go on to try and maintain that as a lawn cemetery and maintain the aesthetic appearance of a lawn cemetery going forward, and so we don't end up effectively with this creep situation as you described, and effectively gradually over time losing control, if you like, in terms of the management and enforcement of the requirements. I think clearly around the issues to do with communication, I mean, any changes effectively that are made in the report, we will clearly look to effectively communicate those with users and stakeholder groups who actually use the cemetery. I think what we've tried to do in terms of this report is strike the right balance and effectively ensure that we try and effectively present and provide a facility that effectively is one that effectively is presented in the most suitable light, effectively presents itself in the most aesthetically pleasing way, allows us to manage it most effectively, but equally allows us to try and manage access requirements and safety requirements for users. And obviously what we don't want is any users potentially in the cemetery, you know, once it starts to get dark, etc., because clearly, you know, there are concerns around that in terms of their safety, and also in terms of us being able to make sure that we can easily check the cemetery before we close the cemetery, ensure that anybody doesn't get locked in, because there have been occasions in the past, particularly at certain times of the year, where people unfortunately have been locked in cemeteries because they haven't been seen stooping behind a headstone, beyond the hours of sort of like when the daylight starts to fail. So I think we can address those situations in terms of what's being proposed in the report.
So, two things occur. What was I going to say? No, I'll come back to it actually. Councillor Coleman wanted to.
Thank you. Through the chair. Right, I actually agree with most of this. The daylight hours, totally, because seeing what happens to graves when people get in there after hours, it's terrible. A lawn cemetery is more respectful. Actually, when you sign for a lawn cemetery, you sign an agreement which is legally binding, and you have to adhere to what is in that contract. So if you go above a certain size of your headstone or you go beyond, you can be brought up on it. But as Councillor Pengelly said, it is policing of it to make sure it happens. And what's one person's idea of tasteful is another person's idea of tacky. So it's very difficult to actually be sensitive, because that's what we've got to be. It's a very sensitive situation. Totally agree with only one grave at a time, and totally agree that people outside the area shouldn't be allowed to be given priority over people living in the area. So generally, I do agree with this document because it is an extension of what you've got. And while I totally agree with green burials, and I think it is the way forward, this is an extension of an existing plot to try and deal with the situation where it is at the moment, where graves are needed urgently. Thank you.
I thought, when the consultation that we talked about in the previous paper that ends on 4th of September, was there a question on these regulations in there? So there wasn't part of that?
No.
Okay.
No.
So is there an opportunity to look at the regulations to the existing part of Shire Lodge to provide some guidance as to what actually could be allowed in future on the existing, on the original part of the cemetery, rather than have this situation where people have, I know there's one or two that have caused officers concern.
There's quite a lot in there that cause some concern.
Yeah, I was being...
Because, the regulations don't really relate to what's there, to be honest, do they?
No. And we're attempting to deal with certain situations, and they're proving very difficult.
Yeah, no, I
we can't get anybody to remove it.
Yeah, but I wonder if the regulation, because surely if all these things are done by stonemasons, they're not done by the families. So if you say if a stonemason goes beyond the regulations, surely you've got some control
It wasn't the stonemason that installed it.
Well, I know there's one particular one that causes it, but in general. And there's one thing I was going to suggest. On page 58 in the regulations and memorials and headstones, there's a whole paragraph with all sorts of dimensions. I think it would be helpful if there was an appendix with a diagram that actually showed those dimensions, so that people can understand what centre line of the grave meant, and because whilst the professional stonemasons might, family people certainly won't know what those all mean. So it would be helpful to have something in the end of as an appendix, I think. Councillor McGee.
Thank you. First of all, sorry, I left the room, so I don't know if anyone has already done this, but I think it's only fair that we extend our thanks to the team that have worked on this, probably for many years, actually, because it goes before my time, I'm sure. So thank you from all of us. It's extremely needed here in Corby. We're delighted to have it, and we're extremely grateful for the hard work that's gone into it. And yeah, I mean, I've learnt more about cemeteries in the last couple of hours than I thought I ever would. It's gone a long way. One thing I will say, and it's just me putting my 2 cents in really completely unnecessarily, but I work in the charity sector, and we often talk about putting sticky plasters over things rather than getting to the root of the problem. So if a young person comes to me with a problem, we don't put a sticky plaster on that problem, we work to get to the root of the problem. To me, this looks like you're putting a 25-year sticking plaster on a problem, which I understand is probably the only course of action that you've got to do right now. Completely get it. And, you're better to offer some help to that young person than none. So I get that that's the course of action that you've got in front of you, but it would be great to see some more long-term sustainable thinking. And I think when the green burial point comes up, that will be included and that will take that factor. But I think just to put my 2 cents in the way that my brain works, it does kind of seem like a 20-year sticking plaster. Also, just to come back on the consultation thing, this happens a lot, actually, where we say we're doing consultation or done consultation, but then there's no real evidence of the consultation. My view would be, if we were doing something about a community centre, I would like to see something in the report about what the community centre thinks about the report. The Friends of Shire Lodge Cemetery, I didn't even know that existed until Mark just said it a moment ago, but I would have liked a little summary of what they think, just to consider it, just so we know. I think it's fair. I think it empowers our community groups. It makes our residents feel like we're listening to them. And actually, it's really great for us as well, because I would have known that group exists, and I very well could have contacted them and got some thoughts to bring to you today. So just in the future, I think that would be great to see in reports. And I know that's not exclusively on your team, that's across this whole council, but yours is in front of me, so that's what I'm going with. But I appreciate the work that's gone into this, and thank you for it.
Okay, Councillor Vodarovich.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back on a couple of the points that
Winded up after that.
Indeed, yeah. Firstly, I just do really want to agree with Councillor McGee on the consultation points. I think that would be incredibly useful to have a bit of a summary on that. And yes, empowering our communities to feel like we're really listening is, something I'm very passionate about. So, with the fair points that were made, Mr. Smith, I kind of just wanted to come back a little bit on that. My kind of one big question is obviously we are time limited to a degree. We've got 2 years here, but my real question is really understanding the urgency of that, because I would like to see us go away and assess this properly, because whilst I appreciate that the land layout for a green burial site, you would want to have it just be potentially exclusively that, but it doesn't have to be, and we know that it doesn't have to be, and I kind of feel like saying that we will have a lot of cemeteries that have never considered green burials in their future plan, because it hasn't been something that this council has ever really considered, or previous council have considered. So just to say that this is not something that was in the plan for this area, so we're not going to look into it, doesn't really make sense to me. We're in a new era now, we're facing new challenges, or challenges that we're now actually properly facing for the first time in many, many years. And I think we need to be looking at this, essentially to say that when we're talking about a sticking plaster, we are literally designating the finite numbers that we can accommodate in this site by going forward in this way. We know we have a problem in this area, and by not even considering the sustainable option, I don't think makes sense to me. And I do appreciate it. The topography may not work. It may not actually work or be the best value for money. But I do think at least we should consider it before it goes to executive, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've obviously got Rothwell, and there's also Olney, of course, which is okay. It's outside North Northamptonshire, but it's fairly local. Perhaps if you would perhaps do a note to Councillor Vodarovich about the facilities at Rothwell, what there is there, and if you don't know already, I don't. Just so that, but I think the extension is actually already complete, isn't it? So it's up and running, or would be up and running when the regulations are in.
If that's the case, if this is already, if the layout has been done and there's no way to look at this in another, from another angle, if you like, I would very much, as part of a lot of green burials, part of what people are encouraged to do is to have potentially natural gravestone heads, and also potentially have plant native flowers there rather than taking flowers each time. I don't know, again, if that would necessarily work with the lawn layout, but planting native flowers, or also having like a living memorial such as bird or bat boxes, that is some of the things that they do in other sites. So I don't know, potentially if we could do some sort of medium option there.
Okay, so we've got to the recommendations. So I suppose the first one is to note that the officers are producing a report on green burials, so they are already have that on their agenda. But we've got some other. So are we all happy that it's kept as a lawn cemetery, which is in the recommendations? Presumably we'll understand the reason for single depth graves, which is the ground conditions. So we're happy with that. Well, obviously we've had some comment on the opening hours, but broadly, are we happy with the opening hours being harmonised? Okay. So I mean, that's any other. No, I don't think there's anything else anybody brought anything up.
Could we have something mentioned around looking at the elements of green burial sites and if they could be incorporated? If that's the only compromise that we could sort of make here, I think that would be at least something, because things like cemeteries can be incredibly biodiverse spaces. They already are in Kettering, for instance. We have some amazing, beautiful trees in the Kettering Cemetery. So I think it would be very, very worthwhile just exploring what options we could do there.
So if we could perhaps ask officers to talk to the grounds maintenance people and see what can be done in terms of landscaping and
encouraging those who are family members to.
Yeah, there'll be areas where they'll cut it. So.
Sure, exactly. But yeah.
But that could be done separately, can't it?
Those discussions about greening our cemeteries, they are ongoing with grounds. and we've made some progress again in Rothwell. So, you know, it's different steps at different times. It doesn't all come together very neatly, but we are doing our best.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've got to the end of that one. Thank you for your presence tonight. I hope we haven't been too hard on you. And thank you for all the work that you've done. Obviously, it's a very sensitive area and complicated area, and people's feelings are very much, you know, to the fore. So, thank you for that. And I hope you're free to go unless you want to hear about trees and things. Okay, so the next one to item 8, which is the tree planting strategy. And we've got, I think Mr. Waterworth is taking this one.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just briefly introduce the report and the policy. So, tree planting policy has been developed with the intention of building on the successful tree planting that's happened across North Northants in recent years and increase the tree canopy cover across public and private land from an estimated 10.5% to meet the national target for tree canopy coverage of 17% by 2050. So to achieve this, we've mapped out a target of 600 to 700 trees to be planted per annum, alongside the whip planting and natural regeneration of sites between now and 2050, as well as working with private landowners to encourage planting on their land as well. But also, along with planting, it's also vital that we protect our existing tree canopy, and so the policy also identifies a number of key priorities, such as biodiversity of tree species that are planted, the importance of aftercare, in particular protection of the new trees and watering to ensure that they're the best chance to reach maturity. Biosecurity when acquiring the trees, and community involvement. And we have a great network of volunteers and friends of groups across a number of areas in North Northants, and there's a real opportunity to build on that with other community groups, schools and businesses to encourage planting and tree care across private and public land. I've detailed some of the funding in the report, which gives indicative figures to achieve this target. I think we all recognise that we're in a challenging financial environment, and it would be likely required that we need to reprioritise existing budgets to achieve this. However, I would also point to the success that we've had with attracting external funding for tree planting, in particular £1 million from the local authority tree planting fund, and we currently have a bid in at the moment that are awaiting, hopefully, fingers crossed, positive news on for £400,000 worth of grant money for further tree planting over the next tree season, which starts very shortly. So yeah, that's in summary what the policy is aiming to do, and I'm happy to take any comments or feedback on the document.
Okay, so thank you. On page 65, what is understory planting? So, not a term I've come across before.
Yeah, so if you've got the canopy coverage, understory is where you start to develop whips and things like that underneath the canopy, particularly if you've got trees that are likely to not survive, like particular ash dieback. So if you have an identified area of ash that's likely to be needed to be removed due to ash dieback disease, you would start to develop the under canopy of trees coming through, so that when that tree is unfortunately removed for disease or otherwise, you've got that canopy coming through rather than having to wait to plant the tree and wait many years for it to mature.
So it's not that trees you have to replant, but just like shade. In 753, you've got engagement with members will be initiated, and I want to emphasise the importance of that, because I can think of 2 occasions where one in my ward where trees were planted, one without telling us, and 2 in the wrong place that affected something else and are going to have to be moved because nobody told us. So engagement, but not just members, but also town and parish councils. And in fact, when you go to the actual strategy, it's policies or regulations or strategies, in 4.22 or 4.22, talks all about volunteer involvement and so on, but it never talks about engaging with town and parish councils. which I would have thought was, and possibly other groups as well, but particularly those groups need to be involved in any conversations, I would have thought. Those are my points. Sorry, did Councillor Pentland want to come in?
Sorry, Chair.
Maybe
sorry,
they are,
Jonathan,
but it's not in the report.
sorry for jumping in there. Thank you, Chair, for those 2 points. I thought I'd quickly jump in before Jonathan, just say you raised an important point where perhaps the consultation earlier on in planting processes was not as robust as it could have been, and the team went away and had the lessons learned there, and I know that there is a better process in place for informing members about tree planting in their ward. I think the points you have made around engaging with the town and parish councils is also an important one. I know that the town council and the parish council in my ward proactively plant trees, and it would be good to liaise with them on those. Thank you.
Go on.
Yeah, no, thank you for those really important points, actually. And what I'm happy to do is take that away in terms of actually adding that into the policy to say that where it relates to public land, we will engage with ward members in advance. But also, we could add in about the town and parish council engagement in that section that we're looking at in terms of engagement with stakeholders. But also, we could go as far to say that where we get requests, so there'll be 2 different kinds, where perhaps the town council is looking for advice or parish council looking for advice in terms of planting on land that they own, versus they coming to us to say, could we plant on land that you own? And this policy can provide that template for, as long as the planting is going to follow these principles, so there's going to be proper aftercare of the newly planted trees, they're the right sort of species, or species that we approve, then it provides that sort of standard that we can then allow the planting to go ahead without what can be quite lengthy discussions and understanding, because we all want to see planting. It's just, it needs to be in the right place with the right tree and have that aftercare element to make sure that the trees have the best chance of survival. So I'm happy to work that into the policy to cover those points.
Yeah, that's a very important point. In the former East Northants area, there's a different situation from Kettering, Corby, whatever. And the other thing is that sometimes hedgerows are better than trees, particularly for absorbing the car fumes, because they're at the right level. Did you want to come in? Yes. Thought you might.
Thank you very much. Of course, I'm going to talk about trees. Thank you very much. I do really want to say just a massive thank you to the grounds team, tree teams who have been working so hard, I know, and especially the amount of funding that has been sought has been not only noticed by myself and councillors, but I've had a lot of residents really notice the increase in tree planting across the area. And mention also the consultation as well. I think it's, there's obviously been, I'm sure, a couple of hiccups along the way, but people have been generally really, really appreciative, and I just want to make sure to say that. I think it's really interesting to see about, obviously, that our target's been set on the sort of government recommendation for 2050. I do think that we probably should be more ambitious. I also balance that with, I appreciate how much effort and work goes into this, and that it's not easy, and we want to do quality over quantity. Actually, however, I will share some really interesting things that I've been looking into this in great detail, as you will, I'm sure, imagine. But 3.3, I'm just going to whip through in order. So 3.3, nor would it protect existing canopy. I know you sort of mentioned about protecting existing canopy. I didn't really get that come across as part of the strategy in the way that I would probably like to see it. Obviously, we're talking about protecting new trees and the maintenance of that, but I really, and this has come up, I've talked to Councillor Pentland about this, we've wanted to really see this properly be addressed with proper existing trees, and especially healthy trees that need to have a better level of protection, but yet it's not happened. So I think obviously this trees has come to different scrutinies, but I do think this, I have requested this come to the planning EAP, which I think is the best place for it. So if that could come forward, that would be very helpful, just as a recommendation from this panel. 5.1, comparing numbers planted versus removed. I appreciate that this is obviously one metric, and it's something to sort of show the progress, and we have made an awful lot of progress in this area. However, other councils have got other systems as well to at least help us understand how much progress we're making. Things like systems to show carbon sequestered by the tree based on the diameter of the trunk. There are formulas out there to understand this, and I do suggest that we need to be doing the same. So if we are taking out X amount of it was 1,200 have been removed. They will have been big, hefty, well-established trees. The 20,000 trees that have been planted, some of those will be whips, some of those will be standards. So I think we just need to be talking in equatable metrics there. And I have got a good link that I can share as well with this panel and officers, which might be useful on just like calculations of that. So also, I was looking at Eastleigh Council, and there's some really good policies from there, which I thought I wanted to mention. They've done some really good things as well, but beyond like requiring developers to work with and around existing tree stock where possible, but enforcing TPOs, monitoring development to ensure adherence to planning conditions, proactively putting in place TPO area orders to stop preemptive felling where trees are deemed to be under significant threat. I'm even dealing with a case piece right now which is exactly this, and we know that a tree is under threat, and we're yet not looking at proactively doing something about it. So yeah, I'll send this link as well with a bit more information, but I think putting some of these within our general tree policy, it's vital. It's part of the picture, and protecting our canopy. That's all well and good putting more trees in place, but we need to also protect what we have. And I know that our local residents really care about this and have cared for a long time. Also things like, one thing that Eastleigh does, which I thought was really interesting, was they have their own tree nursery as a council. So in terms of sustainability, in terms of the costs of planting, an increasing number of trees, I think that is something that needs to be considered, because funds such as grants may not always be available, we may not always win them. I think it would be really good to have, or at least consider something like this, especially because Eastleigh are then utilising it as an income stream as well, which then can continue to fund this and other projects, which I think is really, really good. And Eastleigh are looking to plant a tree for every resident that they have by 2030, which I just think is really amazing. And I think we should be that kind of bold and ambitious. I think some sort of smart goals like that is quite impressive. So yeah, 5.2, the goal to involve community, I would love, we're obviously going to be looking to involve local community groups, but I wondered if we could work with local community groups to get more trees planted in people's gardens. I don't know if that's something that we could do through them to sort of disseminate the trees. I know that like Rotary groups in other areas have done things like this, and obviously it needs to be right tree, right place, but things like fruit trees could also support local resilience, cost of living, access to healthy food. We're actually quite an unhealthy area in terms of the whole of the UK, as we'll talk about more on Thursday. But I think that could be something that's quite good. And also in terms of the community involvement and town and parish councils, just let me find that note. Essentially what I was going to say, I'm trying to find it, which was, it's a really good point, getting town and parish councils involved. Potentially could we have a briefing for them? Or, I mean, I know that some officers have even been out and done presentations to town and parish councils. I think that might be a bit onerous, but an online presentation or briefing would be good. And actually asking town and parish councils about the groups in the area, community groups, because they will probably know more than us what groups are out there and could be interested in sustaining some of these projects. Right, 3 types of planting. We didn't really get, I'm sorry I haven't written down the page for this, but we did talk about 3 different types of planting. And I was kind of surprised to see that street tree planting wasn't involved in that. Another thing as well, as you've mentioned, is hedges. Hedging can sequester a lot more carbon and provide sometimes even better habitats for wildlife than trees, more diverse habitats. Other councils have done some really exciting hedgerow restoration work, and England's national character areas were studied by the Countryside Charity and found that essentially 1/5 of all of these area studies had historically high levels of hedgerow cover, which has since been lost and not sufficiently replaced. And actually one of our local areas, Rockingham Forest, is listed as a high priority for hedgerow restoration. So, and Northants as a whole is number 2 priority. So this could be a really good opportunity for us. And almost 30% of these studied areas have hedgerows in poor condition. So, and 50% in like a medium condition. So it's not just about we've got these hedgerows, but actually they're in a poor state. So looking at something like that could be quite useful. Biodiversity, we've kind of talked about in this report that biodiversity is important, plays a really important role, but I think this is possibly something just to consider going forward, but I do think we need to have some measures of success here. There's not really any measure of what we're looking to try and achieve with this other than just increased canopy. So as part of the community group work, it might be worthwhile considering encouraging those local groups to collaborate on specific projects to go and assess the insects, bird calls, bats. People are already doing this. In Kettering, you've got the Kettering Nature Group who are actively doing this. They would literally bite your hand off if you asked them to work with you on it. So there's Kettering Nature Group, but I'm sure there are other groups around the area that would want to do this or could consider going forward. Community orchards should be especially considered for left behind areas because that like to offer the benefits of like free fruit and the benefits that brings. Community involvement, I've put here, could community groups get involved in an online or an in-person planning meeting, getting them to feed into ideas, helping co-produce the plan? I think that would be wonderful. But also, I appreciate that it's always time, isn't it? School programs, collaborate with schools to integrate tree planting activities into the curriculum. I think this is lovely to see. However, my big question is, will there be staff resource for this and how much? Because I know that we have quite a lot of other areas that also need some support, but we'd need to get out into schools, but I kind of worry that that's just going to get left behind a little bit. And tree wardens on page 77. This is my final point, you'll be glad to know. Long-term engagement for this. I just think it'd be really great to have essentially a page on the council website, maybe not necessarily just for tree wardens, but for the community tree planting element, just to make sure that people have a clear place to go, especially because I would love to promote this. But it says as part of this point that people be encouraged to get involved, but it'd be great to have, I think, just a clear page on that and clear ways of getting involved, and we can promote that. Thank you very much.
Okay. If you've got that all written down, it might be helpful to send it to the car. I understand that actually there's funding for community orchards, so what might be worthwhile is asking Liam to attend the town and parish forums and just do a presentation to them, because they've also often got the facility, so that might be a way of spreading it. Anybody else? Councillor Wilkes.
Chair, just two points of clarification. So actually, thinking of community orchards, so as somebody that lobbied for Raunds Town Council to create a community orchard for a number of years, that has now successfully been planted. It's started to fruit, in fact, this year. My thinking wasn't to create a community orchard to try and meet these targets. It was simply that I wanted the school children to have somewhere to go to actually learn about where fruit came from. But are those, so there are 150 trees in there. Raunds Town Council will do another 50 have done another 50 trees this year. Do those add towards a target? Because actually, if you think 600 to 700 trees a year that we've got to plant to hit the government target, it sounds like a lot until you think, well, that's one small town council that will have contributed 150 trees some years ago, but 50 this year. Are they counted towards the targets? And if not, can we try and measure them?
They would be counted if they were standard trees. So if they're just whips going in, then that wouldn't count towards the canopy coverage yet. But obviously it would hopefully do so as time goes on. So this policy will clearly need to be monitored frequently in terms of measuring that change. And within the strategy, we've put down about 2028 as a review of what increase have we affected through that planting. But certainly that planting can be included in the Northants figure. Perfect.
Which actually leads us on to the town and parishes just need to know what size tree would count now, because there is a ton of funding around. I'm sure every councillor here is telling all of their residents and local towns and parishes about all. There's so much funding. I've never seen so much for tree planting and community orchards. And actually, you can choose the type of tree that you want in. You can almost choose the size of it. You can't go fully grown. But actually, if we could let them know, it may be for the sake of an extra 6 inches, it helps hit the target. And my second and last point is, when we're absolutely for trying to hit the government target, exceed it if we can a word of caution, can we not go down the route of trying to make all of our roads pretty tree-lined avenues? Because as great as that sounds, if you look at any of the councils, I think of Southwark and Bermondsey that we were invited to have a look at their tree-lined roads back in 2016. There was such an expense in trying to maintain it. They were cutting them down as fast as they could because, of course, trees along the side of roads damage pavements. Visually impaired people are constantly being injured, tripping over. So right tree, right place. It is never, from what I can see, alongside a pavement.
Funnily enough, you've picked up a point that I've made a note, because this is presumably about what I shall call amenity trees, not highway trees, because they would be a whole separate subject and probably don't come under you anyway, do they? I think that perhaps the report might help to make that clear, because there have been a number of instances where highway trees, roadside trees have had to be taken down, and nobody's been told, and everybody gets very upset because they've lost the tree, despite the fact it was maybe in the way, and they've lost the tree in front of them without anybody telling them. But that's probably not gone through your department, so I think we perhaps need to be clear about whose responsibility and what's a highway tree and what's not.
Do you want me to answer that now? Yeah, so in urban areas, the street trees do come under the grounds maintenance team, so that would be factored into this in terms of numbers. There has been a change in the last year or so in terms of the consultation around street tree removals and the circumstances and giving notification to local residents. So the team follow that in terms of that process they have to follow. But yes, this would cover street trees, but on a right tree, right place basis. And appreciate street trees aren't always the right thing to do in terms of localities where there's competing issues around parking and other things.
Well, I mean, certainly don't want lime trees because they're but so if one is replaced, if one is taken away, is it replaced? Because there's rules about where you can have trees get alongside the highway and the distance away. But if you're replacing one that was already there, I remember one of the first things I noticed when I came here from where I lived before, went on one estate, and I thought, what's different? And there were no trees in the verges where I'd lived before. All the verges, it's an old established estate. All the verges had a tree, in them, and it was just so different. So if you lose them, it does notice. I don't know if you don't want to comment.
I mean, in terms of the street trees, I think there's been a different approach historically, but generally where we take a street tree out now, then we would look to replace that, and we only take it out for certain reasons, and that's set out in the tree management and care policy.
Another one. Councillor Bengali.
Whatever we do, we have to have a long-term plan, because Corby, it was very close to being like a garden city, because when you look at the Lloyd's estate, all them beautiful tree-lined streets, and you've got these historic pictures of them first being planted, and then 60 years later, they're sucking all the moisture off the bottom of from the foundations of housings are collapsing, and we had a big scheme about 20 years ago where we had cut loads of trees down, and so when we're planting these trees, have we got a long-term management plan? Because there's no point just putting them there and then leaving them and they either live or they die, because trees have to be managed and looked after. If they're not, they wilt away. When this scheme first started, it was absolutely brilliant. It was consultation. And then I think it's because so many trees had to be planted and the officers had so much pressure on. And for us as elected members, and we're all everybody in, and I think all our councils are active elected members, And we're getting phone calls saying, why will them trees appear, Councillor Pengelly? I don't know anything about them. Well, they're going to, it's just going to, my sights, I'm not going to be able to see out my house. They're just covering the park over. And so there's got to be that consultation to let us know what's happening. Because if you're taking a part of a park where people have been playing baseball or cricket for years and years, people get upset because it's a recreational area where people want to play. So I think the officers done an absolutely brilliant job. I think when they've taken trees away on some of the verges, they've planted them, they've got a plan to plant them again, but we've got to have a long-term plan. And when you're talking about trees and gardens, especially in Corby and in the older estates, it's probably in other areas as well, in some of our council estates, old council estates, the size of the trees in the back gardens are massive. People can't see because they're spoiling people's way of life. There's no way to manage them because you can't get into them. Who owns them? Who's got control of them? Some of them are falling apart and they're a danger. Some of them have got diseases and other things. And we have to have a policy of looking in people's back gardens and private ones as well and looking at what we're going to do because these are massive areas. And I've got quite about 3 or 4 inquiries and members' inquiries right now on trees in people's back gardens. And it's a difficult thing for officers to do because they own it. That's owned by a private that tree that's affecting you in the council property owned by somebody who's with a private garden, but it's affecting that person there. And it could fall on that person's house. So there's things we have to look at through our old tree policy. But I'd like to say, well done for all the work you're doing. It's really, really good. But consultation, especially elected members.
Yeah, constantly, I mean, the state I've got, constantly people complaining that the trees are over the house and leaves are going in their gutters and they've got no light and it's interfering with the sky and God knows what else. So yes, the right tree in the right place. So any other comments? But generally, are we those comments were happy with the policy? Yeah, sorry, did you want to? We just. Yeah.
I do appreciate. Thank you, Chair. I do appreciate. I did bring like a barrage for you, but I didn't know if you wanted to come back on any of those points, such as like adding on in some. I mean, I can sort of send over some of these things that like Eastleigh are doing that might be useful. I mean, I guess that's just something maybe this can be considered and taken away and reconsidered before it goes to executive. I don't know if that's helpful.
So, can you clarify what you wanted? Go on.
Chair, I'm happy to work through a few of the answers to Councillor Fedorovic's questions if you want, in terms of the key points, and then there's some others that might be easier just to pick up offline in terms of the detail of those and clarifying what you're looking for. But I suppose the first bit in terms of the ambition, I suppose in terms of setting the ambition, we've tried to be realistic in terms of what budget we know we have and how we can make that work. I mean, it'd be fantastic if we could exceed that target, but at the moment, that's what we've based it on in terms of being a realistic target for us to achieve, but also with that ability to review progress and if we feel we can, we're in a different position to increase or change that target. In terms of protecting existing trees, in terms of what the policy or strategy is trying to do, it's careful not to step on the toes of any kind of planning policy or requirements for TROs under that process, which is entirely separate. This is purely just looking at us in terms of how we promote tree planting across our own land, but also with the private sector landowners in terms of that. In terms of the metrics, I'm sure that's something we can do in terms of that CO2 provision, in terms of, you know, how we're comparing the loss of a mature tree versus planting a standard or etc., how we can do that. Whether we can do it for this, but in the future in terms of reporting on targets, I'm sure we can factor that in. Tree nursery, so it is in the policy. I think it's 4.24, where we have an aspiration in our goals going forward is in that we want to develop our own tree nursery. So we've got our own stock of trees coming through. So if we have to remove a street tree or any other tree, we've got a stock that we can choose from to move that across North Northants in terms of providing that. So that's something that the team are really keen on. Obviously, there's a few things we have to do before we can get there, but it is an ambition we want to get to. There was bits around resident planting and a town and parish council briefing. Perhaps if we pick that up offline in terms of what that might look like. And I pick up the point on standard planting and hedgerows. I think we probably could increase the amount of hedgerow discussion in the or promotion in the policy in terms of the importance of that, because it does have a part to play. So I'm happy to take that away. We do work with the Rockham Forest Vision Group around things like hedgerow, tree planting, etc., and that engagement with those owners. So it's something we can weave into that. The biodiversity point in terms of the measure of success, the focus of that is more on the different tree species that we plant. So make sure we're not having a monoculture issue where you lose all trees of a certain species, and there's some diversity and resilience in terms of the types of tree species there. But certainly we can provide lists and data on what sorts of trees we're planting, how many and how varied as part of any kind of review process. I think that was most of the points. There was a bit around community orchards. So we have got community orchard plans, and there's also a community orchard being looked to put in Coronation Park. Obviously there's some further discussion to have around that, particularly with local ward members, but that's something that we'd like to bring forward. And then in terms of having the tree policy and promoting it, we want to get this on the website once it's approved and go through the appropriate processes, and ideally we'd be looking for ways we can engage and promote the policy and ways that my team can engage with various stakeholders. So again, happy to pick that up offline.
Actually, you reminded me of something. Wellingborough did have a tree nursery. And it's the land is still there. I haven't, because it's a bit remote, I haven't been on it to see what success has been, but there is a tree nursery there already. So it might be worth just Liam looking at it to see where it stands. And the other thing that did slightly worry me, it says in the report that these trees require an average of 50 litres of water each week during the spring and summer. And 600 trees times 50 litres of water, that's an awful lot of work for somebody to do. I know it's a rain, but I mean, we can't say how much. But so I don't know how we monitor that we're managing to feed them sufficiently.
So as part of the treescape funding that I mentioned, we are required to monitor, and we receive funding specifically for the watering of trees to pay for the cost of the water and the person to go and water it. So, and we have to demonstrate that we are doing that as part of the funding returns. So yes, it is part of the programme of works in terms of building that in terms of the initial planting and then the aftercare for so many years afterwards.
I mean, some of them are nowhere near a particular water supply, so you must take a bowser in the middle of a field, which is, yeah. Okay, so we're all happy. Sorry, Councillor Bennett, do you want
Chair, sorry, if I may just come back in, just piggyback off some of the points and respond to some that have been raised. In terms of the ambition, quite rightly Jonathan set out that we have to work within the scope that we have, the resources available. But we have done really well so far, I would suggest. In 2022 to 2023, 6,500 trees were planted. And I believe I'm correct in saying that we surpassed that for 23-24 with 10,000 being planted, which was an ambition that we had. So if we're able to continue getting in that funding to do so, we will be able to exceed it quite well. I suppose a point of clarification perhaps for anybody listening is just to mention that where we remove trees, it is under a very specific set of circumstances, for example, disease, etc., and that's carefully monitored. So I know that upon reading it, to see 1,200 trees come out might be a little bit alarming, but it is under those very specified conditions as well. The points around liaising with town and parish councils, certainly take those on board, and I think there's a possibility to work with organisations such as the Woodland Trust, who we do already have a good working relationship with, to further that. They're well versed in all of this and really want to engage with as many local authorities as they can in that regard. And in relation to the measures of success in terms of biodiversity as well, Jonathan mentioned this. This was a point I clarified earlier with Liam and his team around how we're measuring that. And that ties into the biodiversity net gain work that we're doing. But it will also relate to the local nature recovery strategy and the metrics that the team are pulling together in regard to that. So there's plenty of work that can be done there and expanded out. And then the final bit, just to pick up on the Chair's points around watering. I know that Liam pointed out in his presentation to the EAP the other week around kind of watering bags that the trees sit in that mean that you don't have to return for a week in terms of watering. They have sufficient. So there are different technologies that we are able to use to make sure that process is a little bit more resource less intensive, if that makes sense. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. So we'll, sorry. Go on then.
Just very quickly, thank you for all of those points. You covered everything very well. I will send you some of my links and then that might be useful. Nursery in the aspirations, I think that's brilliant as well. Sorry, I did actually miss that. My bad. But the with the nurseries, I know, like you say, there are a few already in existence in the area, and that might be something that we could just partner with some of the existing nurseries. I know that there's definitely one near Grafton Underwood that could potentially be maybe expanded. We could partner with them. Yes, I also was going to mention about the ambition and potentially for when we come back to re-review this in the future, and I know that one of the councillors has already mentioned about partnering with community groups to include their numbers in our total. I do think we should, and we should. And I think having that like kind of relationship with groups, especially things like farmers as well. I know that they've got obviously a huge amount of space like for like hedgerows and could be a really good partner. But I think the big thing as well that local community groups really need is support on knowing what to plant where. That's one of the big things that we've come up against. I think if we could give more support on that and be real partners to those community groups, I think they'd be very happy for us to sort of have theirs included in our total. But thank you.
Okay, so we're happy to recommend where we ask for any specifics. I don't think so. Note the impact and provide feedback and provide on the planting hire. So we're happy with all those. Yep. All happy? Yeah. Okay. Item 9, surplus asset disposal.
Thank you, Chair. So this report details 2 sites for consideration for disposal under the Council's asset disposal policy. So the first is a former elderly person's home, Beach Close, Desborough. This was exited by the Adult Social Services due to care compliance challenges, which are detailed in the report. We've explored alternative uses with other service areas, including the Children's Trust, education and housing, but they've deemed it not suitable, principally because of the conversion costs or new build costs in terms of the site. The other site is a former highways yard in Irflinborough, now deemed no longer required by the highways team, and we've explored any other uses internally, but there are none at present in terms of other service areas, so we're proposing to dispose of that site. We provided an indication of values in the report, but clearly the sites will be marketed fully to ensure we achieve the best value possible as part of the disposal. And you'll also note in the recommendation that we're seeking views from the committee in terms of how asset disposal updates are provided going forward, and I think scrutiny is an important part of those disposals in terms of ensuring that we're not disposing of something and haven't considered it from all different angles before we do so. But we also acknowledge that there's demands upon the agenda in terms of policy and strategy items for the committee to also consider. So again, we're inviting views in terms of whether you wish to continue to receive reports like this, or whether you'd be content with written briefings with an opportunity to comment directly with myself and the team. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we deal with this in 2 halves. So has anybody got any points on the 2 properties in question? Councillor Pengelly.
Yeah, the one at Edinburgh, I've got not much because I don't know the site very well. The Beach Close one, a little bit confused. The report is lacking in a lot of detail. Demolition of the existing building and build new council houses on land. This is not financially viable. Can I ask why it's not financially viable? Can you see the facts and figures that say that? We've got a new government now, and the new government are clearly saying that there'll be money coming forward for councils to build council houses and release the money for council to build council houses. We're using our our capital receipts right now on buying ex-council properties, would it not be best? This is a cracking piece of land in the middle of Desborough where we need council properties, and we're not developing any new land, and the land that we own is getting less all the time. And so if we've got a piece of land we can build council properties on, let's look at doing it. And the report itself, you don't even know what you're going to get for it. It says we may get £1 million, but you don't know. So I don't know how the maths has come together on this report, because we're being told you might get £1 million, you might not get £1 million. I don't know where the maths are, and now you can say it's not viable. Who put the scheme together to say it's not viable? If we own the land and it's empty, it gets demolished and we build new council properties, it's got to be good for us. It's got to be good for the people of Desborough as well.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So in terms of the consideration around the viability, that goes through the housing team in terms of determining what it would cost to either remodel or new build. They've gone through that process and said, no, this isn't a suitable site for them. I'm happy to get further detail in terms of how they've made that consideration. I know a lot of the challenge at the moment is the borrowing costs and things like that in terms of just making schemes very difficult and challenging to deliver. And whilst, you know, on the face of it, this is a well-placed site, it does have challenges in terms of the building that is there, in terms of making it suitable for certain uses. In terms of the value, the figures provided are just to give the committee an indication of the sort of value of the asset. We're talking £1 million, £5 million. It's to give a range of figures. The ultimate value will be what we achieve on the open market. And obviously we would give a guide price as part of that open market process. But we're mindful that we also want these reports to be as open and transparent as possible. So what might not be appropriate is to put things like valuation details in there entirely, but we were keen to give the committee a guide of what sort of figure we were talking about in terms of the potential disposal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we've got any firm information about what might be available centrally, but we've had the same issue with properties in Desborough where housing decided it wasn't viable for them.
Well, if Henry Boot, and I'm just using them because it's not about as much now, are saying that they can come in and buy that site and they can build 48 properties on it and put them for sale, then North Northants Council can take that site and build council properties on. The new government is saying, let's see what the budget says, that they're going to give money to councils, allow councils to release the Public Works Loans Board money to build council properties. If that land's not there anymore, we can't do it. So where we've got land, let's keep it and invest in it for the people we represent. Because what's going to happen, as we talked earlier, they're going to be they're going to be £400,000 houses that the people we represent can't afford. They're probably needed, but there's enough of them going on. This is our land. Let's build houses that people need on it. We've got a massive situation with homelessness in the authority.
So I think the recommendation. Well, sorry, do you want to come in before I say it? Yeah, well, I was going to make a recommendation, but yes, go on.
Just really very quickly, on page 80, 2.3, it kind of actually taps into kind of what you're saying, but disposing of surplus assets generates revenue and reduces the council's carbon footprint. It reduces our assets, but it doesn't reduce the carbon footprint for the area. And I don't really feel comfortable seeing that in the report, if I'm honest with you, because whilst, yes, it takes literally saving in terms of our energy that we're spending money on, but my worry is that do we have a known investor that will come in and take that place? We don't know. My worry is that it's going to become an area that just becomes an eyesore that degrades the community. Someone else, if it's costly to invest in that property, what's to say that someone else is going to come along and do it? We know that we need specifically housing and or children's homes locally as two big things, and we did have a few. Quite a lot of different other options which gave some clear reasoning why we couldn't pursue any of those, but we didn't have for housing or for children's homes. And also things like the Care Commission guidelines are stricter than general flats. We wouldn't necessarily have to have. I mean, that could essentially be turned into affordable accommodation with a communal area, and it could be for sort of one-bed options. You could use it for like homelessness issues that we've currently got. There's lots of different issues that I don't feel like I've had enough explanation as to why it couldn't be utilised for that. So I think that's kind of a couple of my main points. I think in terms of coming to scrutiny, provided good processes have been followed, I don't think it needs to come to scrutiny. However, seeing this come forward and that I don't feel that housing or children's home has been explored, or in my opinion, I can't see that in the report. I think I would want to see it keep coming to scrutiny to make sure until we've got those processes like really airtight and make sure that we're disposing of things like fairly. But we do want to work effectively and quickly. So I would usually like to see that not coming to scrutiny.
Right, that's why I wanted to split them into two, so we had a separate discussion.
Sorry, sure. Okay, fair enough.
Councillor McGee, you indicated.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I would like to agree with Councillor Pengelly and say that unfortunately I cannot support this because I don't feel that the right amount of information has been given. It may well be that it's not financially viable and that our only option is to sell it, but I don't see that. It's not been sold to me in this paper. So considering there is a new budget coming in October and there are headlines that read, we want councils to invest in housing, and also considering we have a massive problem with homelessness and young and care leavers and everything else, it just feels really, it feels a bit silly to me, and it feels a bit rushed, and it feels like we should have more detail and it should be discussed. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether it's because it's late in the evening or it's the heat in this room, but I find myself agreeing with Councillor Pengelly and McGee. Fantastic. I agree wholeheartedly. So the plot of land on the A6, a bit in Earthenborough, crikey, I don't know who would want that. I know it's got a small value in here. I know that piece of land, well, I don't know what you could do with it, really. Beach Close, I think is different. And actually, I don't think it's the right time to look at disposing of that particular asset. I think, as Councillor Pengelly has said, the government have made a commitment that they are going to help councils. This is new. It wasn't. I mean, I don't blame officers for that. It's changed recently. So actually, I don't think we should be deferring. I think, if anything, then we just ask the executive, the council, whatever the process is for that, we could write to the government and ask them if they will support us with building those. And if the government will do what they say they're going to do, we keep the land, we build houses that we need, and we don't lose it forever. If there isn't government support for it, then okay, then it comes back and we have a look at what we do with the land. But I think if the government are making a commitment, they're going to help the council, we should at least explore it to see if they actually will help. We do need the houses.
Yeah, I mean, I can fully understand why the remodelling and the extra care would be prohibitive, because I mean the building is not fit for current standards, and it would need considerable amount of work. I don't know what demolition costs and would be, and the cost of building the houses, but I was going to say that we should recommend to executives that they satisfy themselves that the cost, that the viability wasn't there for housing, because it doesn't say, it only says in the report, and work will have been done. And I know work was, because this at one stage was going to be disposed, then one of the departments said they had an interest and then didn't have an interest, so this has been going for quite a while. The housing will have looked at it, but as I said, we don't know if there's new information. So I would suggest that we say to executive to satisfy themselves that by writing, maybe writing to DCS or whatever it's called these days, to find what the situation is before disposing of it. Because if we can build on it, obviously that would be advantageous.
Chair, can I just say, sorry, I think we should go further than just asking, because it'll get lost in the million things that any government's got to do. It'll get lost, and I think we should put a specific request in, because we have a specific piece of land and a specific requirement. And it's time limited, because if we can't build it, then we've got to sell it. So I think we should actually be putting a specific request in for this piece of land. It's a great opportunity.
I could rather look at Mr. Candler there just to see what he about the process, because
well, there are a number of different processes, and obviously Homes England would be the natural body to go towards to see, and you tend to work with them on larger parcels of land. So I think what I'm hearing is this needs further investigation. I'm summarising. This needs further investigation before we put this forward for disposal. So we'll feed that back to the executive lead member, and we'll keep Scrutiny informed of next steps.
What about the recommendation to write to government, though? Because we're having a wee semantic debate again, aren't we? Because that was actually said quite expressly and clear.
I suppose it's what government will want to have a package, I would imagine, but what we will do is we will liaise with housing colleagues to understand what that looks like.
Perhaps involve our Kettering MP and see if we can potentially get a bit of advocacy started.
Well, we liaise with the MPs on a regular basis, so yeah, absolutely. All three MPs, so, or four.
Four, yeah. Okay, so that's what we're going to do with that one.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair, could I just very quickly, just to wrap up that? I mean, that's great, and I fully support that element of it, but I also wanted to, if we don't get anything from the government or from Homes England, I do also think it would be worthwhile. It was a point I didn't get to raise. The assessment was approximately 7 million, and I think it would be worthwhile assessing as well how much we're spending on children being taken to care homes outside of the region. I know we're spending a fair portion, but I think that is part of the picture. If we can't get funding elsewhere, also having that as an alternative option that we explore, because we are...
Children's Trust are mentioned as having been consulted, so presumably they've rejected it, so presumably. And the cost, I'm not sure they would have the money to remodel it. Mr. Waterworth.
So, just to provide the committee with some reassurance, so we are aware of the need in terms of delivery of children's centres, care leavers accommodation, and that's a piece of work that my team are heavily involved in, and looking at other options which are potentially viable in terms of council assets, but also how we would look to position ourselves so that we can start to find solutions locally that might not be in our ownership at the moment. So that's a piece of work that's progressing, and we want to bring forward to be considered by the executive shortly in terms of what a capital budget might look like for that. So you know, these decisions aren't being taken in isolation, and we do consult with the Children's Trust. The feedback we had was this site wasn't suitable. And when they look at that, it's not just down to the costs, it's down to the needs of the children, the location, the sort of accommodation they're looking for, which does get quite complex, which is why we consult with them, but we do make those considerations before bringing these forward. In terms of the housing side, again, I can get further assessment from colleagues on that. So I think the message that I'm taking from this is that you'd like more reassurance around the reasons why the service areas are saying no to them, in terms of that explanation, to make sure that we're not missing something in terms of disposing of an asset.
No. What we're saying is that you've done... Sorry.
No, you go.
Yeah. What we're saying is that since these papers were brought forward, there's been a change of government, and that new government is saying that there will be extra ways of getting money to build council properties. That wasn't there before, because in the past you can use public works board money and things like that. So and what we're saying is let's develop to see what that is, because them opportunities may be there that weren't there several months ago. Yeah. So we're not having got your officers, Jonathan, because at that time that's where we were. Now we're at a different scenario, and that's what we're saying. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, another alternative is to work with a registered provider. Yeah. I mean, that's happened in a number of places. We own the land, and they may find getting funding easier, and then you've got some. So anyway, that's just. But we're all happy with the Earthlingborough site being disposed.
That could go.
So part two of the conversation about what we need to see. And I mean, my view when I looked at this before was that if we got a Nuston Hall or a Beach Coast, then it should be something we had a chance to look at. But if it's a chipping yard, and we don't need to see it. So the suggestion here is that we get a briefing, which would presumably be something like one of these appendix sheets, and if we were worried, we could then ask for it to be on the agenda. If we're not worried, then it could pass through. I mean, that was in brief what I was, my expectation. Is that everybody happy with? So we still get a written briefing. Yeah. Okay. Splendid. We're all happy with that. Okay. And I think that just leaves our work programme. So this is really, on page 91 onwards, this is really for information only as to what's coming up. If anybody has anything that they urgently want to see added, and let us know. Subtracted, let us know.
Yeah, this looks very, very good. There's, from a meeting I had with George and the highways officers last week, what was intimated to us was that the Kia contract, because it's coming up to 2 years old and they're reaching the KPIs, could look at a year extension. Is that correct? That's what was said. I think that this committee, we should scrutinise on whether Kia gets an extension or not. I know what the leader's been saying about performance or whatever. I think that if we start looking at an extension to the Kia contract right now, without not going through scrutiny, people will be very, very unhappy, including the leader of the council. So I think that's something where, to take it away, Councillor Orman, and see whether that's something we could bring forward. I'm not saying to bring it in urgently, but see whether that's something we could look at.
I'm a little bit confused because I thought it was a 7-year contract with a I should know, with a potential 7-year extension. I don't know where this 2-year extension thing has come from, but it may be if they haven't. There's a thing if they haven't met certain conditions that it can be looked at. But it's a 7-year contract, am I?
So it's a 7-year contract, and then there's the option to extend for 3 individual 1 years. So it's a 7 + 1 + 1 + 1. And then if they complete that, there's a further 4 years on the end of that. What is built into the contract is they need to hit a certain maturity level, which is a number of, sort of key performance indicators, by a set date. And if they hit those, they qualify for that additional year. It's not so. I'm more than happy to bring a paper so that scrutiny can understand that and scrutinise that.
The council on it.
But it's heavily contracted, is all I would say. Yeah. But happy to bring something forward at a suitable time and in advance of when that would happen.
Yeah.
So we've got in October the Highways Inspector Manual, Highways Assessment Management Plan, and Kia would be heavily involved in that. So they will be here anyway. Is it appropriate? And we've only got one other thing, which is a private sector housing. So is it appropriate to expand that a bit? I don't know. Yeah, so we can expand that a bit and ask them for a bit more, and maybe get the KPIs, because there are more than obviously you see at executive. Maybe get some of those and get to them. And then we've also got December Highways back again on what they're doing on the how they're spending the money from the government, assuming they've received it. And again, we've got one or other unadopted roads. So there's a fair few bits coming through. But if you've got more, then please shout, and if we can fit them in, we will. Bear in mind, we've got a short year because we can't do anything after the middle of March. Okay, yes.
Hi. So I did request about procurement being...
no, that doesn't come here. That goes to corporate, and so Lynn Buckingham's got that. And you should have had an email from...
I have, yes.
Yeah,
okay.
right.
I'll discuss that with them.
It was mentioned at our meeting, but so that's why, that's in hand. Okay, so if that's everything, thank you very much for attending. Sorry to keep you so late. Thank you. But that's...